Time sure does fly by when you're having fun. I didn't realize that it was already time for the Christmas edition of Material Busters. On today's edition, my elves are going to be focusing on some of the mechanical properties of materials. Ho, ho, ho.
Hello. To understand the basic mechanical properties of materials, two definitions must first be established. The first is stress. Stress is simply equal to the force divided by the cross-sectional area. Strain is the second definition. Strain simply refers to the amount of deformation a material can take. Thus, it's defined as the change in the length of the material divided by the original length of the material.
Behind me are three basic stress versus strain graphs. They show the properties for the materials, ceramics, metals, and polymers. The first part of the graph is linear, and this shows the elastic deformation. This means that if the load is lifted, then the material will go back to its original state. The second part is nonlinear, and this shows the plastic deformation. This means that if the load is lifted, there is a permanent deformation, and the material won't go back to its original state. Where the material starts to deform permanently is where the material yields, and this is called the yield strength on the graph. And you can find this by using 0.002 strain and drawing a line up to the graph with the same slope as the linear part of the curve.
As my elf pointed out, plastic deformation occurs when a material can't be brought back to its original condition. For example, if I were to bend this paperclip, I can't bend it back to its exact same condition. This is when you know that it's undergone plastic deformation. Now finally, kids, I'm going to show you what a fracture in rubber, a natural polymer, looks like. As you can see, rubber is very ductile and has a high strain at the point of fracture. Uh-oh. See? Normally I use these to shoot my elves with when they're not doing their work. Now I'm going to show you kids what a fracture in ceramics looks like. Remember, safety first, and don't try this at home. As you can see, ceramics are very brittle and have a low strain at their point of fracture. That's why you don't want to drop your mama's dishes, kids, or else then you'll end up on my naughty list. Ho, 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 ho.
Alright, so after yielding occurs, the tensile strength happens at the maximum stress level. Once this occurs, this is a picture of a tensile specimen. Once this occurs, the process called necking happens, where this little region in here is evident. It's called necking. And then after the tensile strength has occurred, all the deformation is confined to this little region right here. Once necking occurs all throughout here, and then once the maximum amount of deformation occurs, fracture happens at that X right there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have two different types of stress strain curves. The one we're most comfortable with is the engineering stress strain. The difference between this and true is the engineering stress strain curve does not take into account of the instantaneous area of the cross-section that occurs during necking. As discussed previously, necking occurs at the ultimate tensile strength. Since this doesn't account for the necking, the initial cross-sectional area is used, so the stress decreases as plastic deformation continues. Now for the true stress strain curves, this curve does take into account for the decrease in the cross-sectional area as seen by this formula. As you can see, the area here is getting smaller, so this stress level will become bigger.
So today, I'm going to go a little more in depth on polymer stress versus strain curves. So here, as you can see, there are three different curves. All of these represent polymers. A simply represents a very brittle polymer that fractures sort of like a ceramic. B represents a polymer that acts kind of like a metal. I say this because it experiences a region of elastic deformation, followed by a region of plastic deformation. Lastly, we have C. C represents an elastomer. This is completely elastic deformation.
From this graph right here, we can deduce the many mechanical properties of materials, first of which being resilience. Resilience is just represented by the area under the elastic region of the curve right here. And resilience is pretty much the material's ability to bounce back to its original shape after a load is put on it. Second, still in the elastic region, we're going to focus on the modulus of elasticity. And that is simply the slope right here, represented by the change in stress, which is the height, over the change in strain right here. That just gives you the slope of this line. Thirdly, we're going to talk about the tensile strength. And this is different for metals and polymers and ceramics separately. For metals, the tensile strength, or the ultimate tensile strength, is represented by this maximum point right here. And this is this stress right here. But for polymers and ceramics, it is at the point of fracture. The fourth mechanical property of materials is hardness. And this is directly related to tensile strength. So the higher the tensile strength you have based on these points right here, the higher or the greater the hardness of your material. Fifth is toughness, as opposed to just the area under this elastic region. It's the area of the entire graph. So toughness is also represented, or is the maximum energy of absorption of a material before it fractures. And it is represented by this full area under the curve. And lastly, we have ductility, and that's how much a material can deform before fracture.
Well now, kids, I've got to go. I've got some work to do. Gotta put on a few extra pounds before the big day coming up. Gonna go eat some of Miss Claus's famous cookies. But Merry Christmas, and have a good year.